Hi, everybody. Hi. You guys bored of us sitting here?
You look great.
All right. So, thanks everyone for coming out to today's presentation about sword fighting and fight choreography. My name is John Harmston, and I'm going to be the moderator and one of the presenters today for our presentation. First, we'll do some quick introductions. So, my background in terms of martial arts is in Taekwondo, Okinawan Kempo, and for the past 7 or 8 years I've been doing European-style sword fighting. And I've been in several movies and working on some film projects right now. As a stuntman and stunt fighter, you end up getting killed a lot on screen by protagonists, and very rarely you actually get to kill one of the good guys, and even more rarely you get to kill a celebrity. So about 2 years ago I was working on a movie called Templar Nation, and in that I was able to murder Eric Estrada with an axe. So, I'm starting a list of celebrities I've killed with an axe. If there's any in the audience, I'm hoping like some A-listers maybe, that, come talk to me afterwards and let's set something up. Let's kind of go down the line now, and everyone will give a little intro about their background and who they are.
Hi everybody, my name is Jeremiah Smith. I also study with John at True Edge Academy. And we've got chapters here in Salt Lake and in Provo, and one in Lehigh that John teaches at. I've basically been doing that for about 4 years. Also been in several movies, also killed by plenty of people in those movies horribly, and then had all my scenes cut, all that sort of stuff. So, spend hours and hours on set, and then you just don't even make it to the final film. Yeah, we're kind of pressed for time, so I'm just going to pass it all down. This is Gar.
Greetings, my name is Gar Villard. I started studying Asian martial arts in the late 80s, and went through various styles, kind of settled on jiu-jitsu, and then probably about 3 years ago, Maya came up to me and said, "You want to learn European martial arts with the sword?" And I said, "Well, only if it's real." And he showed me some stuff, and I was very surprised at the practical nature of it. It's great stuff, and I'm very proud to be representing True Edge Academy and the Historical European Martial Arts Alliance today.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I am the instructor for the Provo group, and also my background is I did the Asian thing, and I did Taekwondo, Judo, Kung Fu, and all that kind of stuff, and the very un-Asian thing, and started doing European martial arts, and I've been doing this for about 4 years now, and it's cool.
Okay, we'll start off, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, so we'll try to breeze through like 2 hours worth of content in the next 40 minutes or so. First, we're going to be talking about hand-to-hand combat, then we'll be talking about weapons in a little bit. And I wanted to take a minute and talk a little bit about some of the challenges of choreographing a fight. So, up on the screen here, you can see some of the things that a fight choreographer thinks about as they're going about putting together a fight and starting to rehearse actors and extras on how to do the moves. First of all, as we all know, action scenes and fight scenes generate excitement, and any good action movie is going to have regular action scenes and set pieces that help propel the story forward. One of the important things about an action scene is that it creates tension, dramatic tension, and a sense of danger and foreboding for all of the various characters. And without that, you end up with boring movies that, if the characters aren't in any mortal danger, then it's clearly not an action movie, and it may not even be an interesting movie, period. A good fight scene will also advance the plot. So something needs to happen in the course of the fight scene. They're obviously fighting over something or for something, so that needs to be taken into account. It also reveals information about the characters. So up to this point, you've seen the characters talk, you've seen them do things, you've observed them, but it's often not until we see them actually fighting that we're like, whoa, this person is super cool, or this person has some ability we didn't know about. And so that is another important aspect of it as well. It can also help not only reveal information about the character, but also help the character advance, help the character progress as they go through the movie. And the most important thing about a fight scene is that it actually needs to tell a story. So the fight or action scene itself is a little tiny story in the context of the movie. So you know how movies have 3 parts? Well, a fight scene would typically have 3 parts. It has the first act, sort of the beginning, setting up the action, setting up what's about to happen. The middle part, where the dramatic tension rises, the protagonist suffers setbacks and increasing levels of danger. And finally, the third act, which is the conclusion of the scene, where generally the protagonist prevails over the others. So those are all some things that need to be taken into account and are, help to really make a good movie great. So now we'll spend a few minutes talking about real life versus film. So in this case, we're going to have Jeremiah and John talk a little bit about some stage combat and film techniques and how to really sell a fight in front of the camera.
Tie my shoes here really quick.
So first of all, when you're making a movie or doing any kind of action thing, you don't really want to punch the person, especially if you do multiple takes, because it would hurt and you'd be sad at the end of the day. So, number one thing for when you do fight choreographies is that you have to be safe. So with that, there's always parameters that you put yourselves in that you practice, and then hopefully you don't get hurt at the end of the day. So right now, if Jeremiah wants to throw a punch at me, ow! I thought you were going to throw a hook. Okay, well, as you can see, we're not as rehearsed as we like to be. So I can't tell from your perspective, but maybe it looks somewhat realistic. You guys are clapping. But as you can see,
The sound effects were lame though.
Yeah, the sound effects. I'm sorry. I'm having to use my hand. But if we were to turn this around, you'll be able to see how far these punches are, like how not close.
Everybody see my shoulders? Yeah. Okay, good.
So I don't know how noticeable that was in the difference of how safe I was and how unsafe it might have looked. But so whenever you throw your punches and things like that, you set the parameters of knowing that you'll be going this far, and that when you throw your punches this way, your arms won't extend to a certain amount. And it's all about perspectives. For theater, you want to know how you angle yourself to the audience, and for the camera, you want to know how far, where the camera is, how far it is, and how you position yourself in between, because perspectives can do a lot of things to change that.
So another thing that we're supposed to be talking about right now, obviously, is the difference between real fighting and stage fighting. So if we go through that sequence again, we're going to see John, doing his thing and kind of be slow about it. This is the funny thing about movies and stage, is that real fights don't really look like that. Most of the time what they're trying to do in movies when fights look like this is show the actors' faces and show how awesome they are at fighting, right? I mean, real fights really just like this, pulling hair, So, you know, when you see lots and lots of awesome karate moves and kung fu stuff, normally that's not what you're going to see on the street. But you will see a lot of this. So there are safe ways to do lots of that grappling and stuff like that, like pulling hair. So if I was supposed to be pulling John's hair, this looks pretty good, right? The way that you do that is to ball your fist up, stick it on his head, and just let him roll all over the place. Also, John, sorry, that was a little loud. Also, John wanted to knee me. I could, you know, do all these sorts of things. John actually missed me almost completely, not that time. But anyway, it's very important to illustrate that normally stage combat is not real combat, and in fact, a lot of times they will speed up the film to make it look better. I mean, everybody's seen The Matrix, they slow down the film too. You know, it's very important to remember that, and to remember that to be a stunt choreographer and a stunt fighter, knowing how to fall down and how to take a punch is very, very different than actually being able to fight. So I wouldn't hesitate to start fights in the street, but I do it all the time at my own club and all sorts of things like that. So, John, if we can do our first sequence again, will show us how you fall down safely. So here we go. Looks pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Are you hurt?
Nope.
So there you go. All right, we're going to turn the time back over to John. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so probably the most skilled Asian stylist up here is Guard. So he's going to talk, not the Asian. And so he's going to spend a few minutes talking about you know, real life versus film, some techniques that, you know, look good in film, don't work in real life, vice versa. And so turn it over to him.
Thanks, John. Okay. Had to run across the con to get my gear. That's a big building. One thing that really helps on martial arts or of any kind is physical fitness, so cardio. I think the thing about Asian martial arts is, and I mean, I told you that I settled on jiu-jitsu. The reason why I did settle on jiu-jitsu is because it is what I would term a battlefield martial arts. It's very deadly. It's very debilitating, and it doesn't take a lot of strength to do it. So I've studied karate and I studied kempo, and we've done sparring there, but in jiu-jitsu we don't do sparring because it's so dangerous. Yeah, we can, you know, throw slow punches and work on techniques, but as far as like we do in True Edge, where we get out and get our swords and actually hit each other, you can't really do that in jiu-jitsu because it's so dangerous. One of the common things that you'll see in films is someone will come in and they'll lead with a kick. So if somebody comes and leads with a kick, I mean, look how slow that is, right? I mean, you see this in the film all the time. He kicks you and you fall down, right? You would never do that in an actual fight, because kicks, even though they're powerful and debilitating, they're slow. You can see how slow. You know, if Jeremiah faces the audience and does a kick towards the audience, just watch how. See, you can see that coming a mile away. He's got to put his foot back, and he's got to hit you, right? So one of the first things you do, if you're going to be in a fight, is you always lead off with your hands, and you want to do something where you take their mind, where you come up to your opponent and you hit them in the face. They flinch, then you'd hit them with your fist, and then you would bring in the kick. So those sort of sequence usually happen in a real fight. They usually happen along those lines. That's usually the way the fight ends. Just depends on what your opponent does. And you got to be really careful when you're doing choreography, because choreography is about the drama. Whereas, like John said, whereas real martial arts, it's not about the drama. It's simply about being efficient and getting to your target and debilitating your opponent as quickly as possible. And that's not pretty. That's just usually well, the altercations I've been in, it's been like one punch, throw them on the ground, wait for security. It's been like that. So I do recommend the study of actual martial arts for anybody who wants to go into choreography or stunt work, mainly because you're going to look better, your techniques are going to look better, and especially something like jiu-jitsu where they teach you how to take a fall. So yeah, you saw John take a fall earlier. That's a jiu-jitsu style fall. So anyway, that's all I got for that.
Great.
All right, so now we will spend just a few minutes talking about weapons. So, in a lot of stunt coordinators, well, in movies, I would say you get a mixed bag in terms of how realistic and how good the weapon fight scenes are. And in my experience, it's actually kind of hit and miss even in a given movie or series. Like, for instance, I can think of Game of Thrones. It has some fight scenes that I thought were actually pretty good, and then a few fight scenes that I was like, I don't know, it's a little tropey, you know, there's not great action that I'm seeing happening. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the differences between good fighting on film and bad fighting, and you know, the weapons involved. Well, now, one of the challenges here is that on a lot of movies, the stunt coordinator is put in charge of choreographing a sword fight. And in many cases, even though he's worked in movies for years or decades, everything he's learned about sword fighting is from other movies. And so, you know, you don't see a lot of real techniques, and you see a lot of silly things that happen. And then you also end up seeing these wushu Chinese stunt coordinators from Hong Kong who get put on a medieval European movie, and so now you suddenly have knights doing spin moves and backflips and things like that. So one of the things that we endeavor for is realism in the sword fighting, but that may not be what you think it means, because real life, in at least the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the sword fighting was extremely dynamic, very advanced techniques, very fast. Okay, the swords themselves, you know, you've got a typical European longsword, and you know, many people believe that this weapon weighs 20 pounds. Well, that's not the case. This one, in fact, is right around 3 pounds. And you can notice that it's flexible because it's made out of carbon steel. It's not the stainless steel like you'll typically see walking around the con today, or hanging on walls, and it's not, you know, foam or whatever. A lot of different movies use different types of weapon simulators. We prefer to use, you know, carbon steel because it handles like real and looks like real swords, even if it's blunt, like in this case. And so maybe we can have everyone take a minute and just kind of mention some of their favorite fight scenes that they've seen. I'll start off. Well, I think if you're looking for a movie that has realistic sword fights, I think The Duelist, which was made probably, I don't know, 20 years ago or more, 79, by Ridley Scott, and it's got a number of duels in it, and for the most part, they're pretty darn good. There's a more recent movie starring Viggo Mortensen called Ella Triste, which I thought had some nice moves in it and some good techniques. Let's hear from the other guys what some scenes they like.
So I love the Green Knight and the Black Knight fighting in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So the funny thing about that is that for a good portion of that whole entire fight, almost all of the techniques that they use are real and appropriate for the weapons that they're using. So despite being the greatest comedy of all time, that is absolutely my favorite fight scene of all time.
I tried to find a fight scene that I liked, and it was very difficult because they. I looked at several movies, and they're always using some technique. They either seem like they're, like for instance, Lord of the Rings. I was watching that the other day, and I noticed that we have, Aragorn's character handling the long sword, and he has a long sword. Make no doubt about it, like a saber. I noticed a lot of techniques that they do the shaky cam, and they block off the strike. Right at the right moment, they block off the strike, and then they flash back to it until his head's rolling on the ground. But I think I was most impressed with the choreography in the Kingdom of Heaven. I thought that was a pretty decent fight scene.
Well, that was the one, yes, you did. But more specifically, in the Kingdom of Heaven, the best fight scene actually doesn't really involve swords, but the protagonist doesn't involve swords. Orlando Bloom, where he's being jumped by the assassins and he beats them over and over again with a rock. That is probably, and a piece of pottery, that probably is the most realistic fight that I've seen. That one, and in the Count of Monte Cristo, not the final fight, but the fight where the bad guy, he's just having some little random duel, and he like stabs the guy and just kind of walks away. That one is actually a very good computer fight, or rapier.
So one of the things that we've kind of touched on a little bit, and we're going to spend a few more minutes talking about, is something called HEMA, which stands for Historical European Martial Arts. HEMA is basically the combat systems of medieval and Renaissance Europe. And not a lot of people realize that during that, those few hundred years, they trained very hard and came up with very sophisticated and deadly techniques. Usually when we see movies, we think of, the samurais or Asian martial artists as the ultimate sword fighters. But, during that same time period, during the Renaissance, the Europeans had honed very sophisticated combat systems that were extremely deadly and fast and look great on film when you see it. Unfortunately, a lot of times you don't see that great choreography, and instead we see the swords are depicted to be very heavy and brutish, and that's not the case. Now, one of the challenges that we face is the fact that HEMA, for the most part, had died out, a couple of hundred years ago. With the advent of gunpowder, they no longer needed swords on the battlefield, and so it was kind of lost. It became a lost art. In fact, it only got carried forward to today in some modern sports, such as boxing, wrestling, judo, sport fencing, things of that nature. However, we're fortunate because the historical masters left behind a legacy. There's probably about 100 existing fight books that were written in the 14th and 15th centuries that are in Middle High German, in Latin, in Italian, and they depicted how to do the different techniques, and the fight masters would explain how to do it. And so now that these manuscripts have come to light and have been transcribed and translated, we can reverse engineer what it is that they actually did during that time period. So maybe a couple of you guys could kind of demonstrate a couple things regarding HEMA style sword fighting.
I'll just be you. How about that?
This is a feather schwert. It's a feather sword.
This is a historical accurate historical representation of what they used to practice with back in the 15th century, except for the rubber tip. But it is it's scaled down. The point of balance is up there. So you get the same kind of feel. If you want to know what handling one feels like, pick up a 3-pound sledgehammer and hold the head right here and grab the handle, and that's pretty much what one of these swords feels like. They're spring tempered. And they come back to true. So then this is what we use in our training, as well as blunts.
Sorry, it's like this. Since we're kind of pressed for time, I'm just going to kind of steal some of John's thunder here. We're going to do some basic swords or counters, and then we can do some more here in a little bit. All right, I'm going to shout, so can everybody hear me? Yeah. All right, good. It's way easier. Okay, so in historical European martial arts, you have stances, and there are a whole bunch of them. There are at least 12, probably more, but I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to go through the first 4, just so you can kind of see that there are static guards and that there are different techniques. So the first guard is called Ox. It's up here to guard your face and your upper body. You can also do it on the other side. Second guard is called Flu. So this is guarding your mid-drift and your lower sections. Third guard is called Alber. This is guarding your lower legs, obviously. And then the fourth guard is called Lumpag, which you see a lot. This is sort of just your basic sword fighting move here. And then the fifth guard we use is called Kron, which is this guard. Okay? So if we were in a real sword fight, and let's say the guard is going to face off with me, and he's going to just throw me a touch from Lumpag, right? What do you think that I'm going to do here? I'm going to try and push his sword out of the way, right? That's sort of what's going to happen, or I'm going to cut around to the other side. So that's what normal people would think, and because movies always tell us that's what you do, that's what you do. But in fact, if guard actually attacked me like this, I would stab him in the face.
I would not like that.
So the main thing to realize about historical European martial arts is that this is a weapon much like a gun. So if you have it pulled out somewhere, you better be willing to kill somebody with it, or else you're going to die yourself. So we'll just go through a couple more really quick, 2 or 3, and we'll move back to John. So if he did the same thing, I could also go and get him here, just move, or I could, again, come back around the other side, stab him in the face, or I could just let him cut me, just let him miss, and get him on the top of the hook. So there are lots and lots and lots of things that you can do in that situation. We studied them all. And we'll just give the time back to John because we have some other myths to bust and other things like that. So let's do that really quick.
Okay, so you'll see that
that the next panelists are going to trip and fall. Whee!
So we'll talk a little bit about some of the common Hollywood sword myths that we all see and love. And let's see here. Okay, so we could go back there. So when I first started doing choreographing fights, I realized that there needed to be a better way a faster way to figure out the choreography. So I developed this system that I call CLAWS, Cinematic Live Action Weapon System. And basically, it allows a stunt fighter to quickly quickly know what it is that you're doing. It's got different sequences of actions, and just based on little triggers that happen, I can choreograph a fight very quickly with someone else. For instance, we will also do live presentations, and do fighting, and we don't even have to we don't even have to like rehearse beforehand. We just, based on this system, we know, based on the guard someone's in and other cues, what it is they're going to do. For instance, I could, this is completely unrehearsed, we'll see what Jeremiah does when I attack him.
$20 on the guy in black.
Oh, just got my finger.
We see the dangers of sword fighting.
There's gloves right there.
Yes, close. Uh-oh. All right. So I'm gonna step off for a second, make sure I don't bleed on the stage, and yeah, we're going to have these guys talk a little bit about some of their favorite Hollywood myths, and kind of go from there. If you run out of time on that, you can go straight into Q&A.
Awesome. So this is all part of my plan all along. Thanks, John. I am the master here. There can only be one. The only one, right? That's the quote. So I'm going to get Guard back up here and I'll shout some more. Hopefully we'll have time for a bunch of other things that we're going to demonstrate. So I'll just have John hold the mic for a second. Okay, so. Yeah, I got it.
Plays dirty.
Put him on, Guard. Go ahead, John.
Okay.
So.
Otherwise we'll run out of panelists.
Right.
It's an elimination. It's like a game.
What's your favorite sword myth, John?
Mine is blocking with the edge.
Okay, so Guard and I are going to demonstrate a whole bunch of sword myths that you won't necessarily see us do if you came to one of our classes. And then we're going to go through some of the choreography like John and I were supposed to. Hopefully he's not let out. We have another demonstration later today. So. All right, so often in sword movies, you see this a lot, right? Can everybody see that? This is not how you block a strike with your sword. Everybody see? There are a couple of reasons for that. That's because you have an edge that you want to cut the other person with, and pretty soon you won't have an edge if you do this, right? The second reason is because you both have edges, when you come to a bind like this, your sword stops. That's not what it's supposed to do. That will lead us to John's favorite myth here in a minute. Anyway, your sword's supposed to be fluid, and again, it flexes like this, just like an I-beam, right? And so, when you see somebody attack and block with their edge every single time, now you're going to think, oh, this is a crappy sword fight. But don't think that. The proper way to block a strike is with the flat of your sword. Everybody see that? And there is the reason. Your sword bends like this, it's not going to break very easy. And, again, if I do it, then my sword moves. All the time. It needs to be fluid. Okay, so Guard, what's your favorite?
My favorite what?
Sword myth.
Sword myth? My favorite sword myth is the debate about what's better, the katana or the longsword. Japanese swordsmanship, here's the thing. We're all made the same way. Look at John, he's Asian, right? See, he's got the same joints, same thing going on as I do. We're all human, right? Our bodies move the same way. So actually, what little Japanese swordsmanship I've studied is very similar to European long sword. It's just that this is a different tool. It has two edges. The Japanese sword is not spring tempered. Okay, so I actually have my katana here, and it's actually quite thick towards the end. It's not, the balance point is way out here. It's a heck of a chopper. But if you have to keep your hands perfectly in one position the whole time you are using this, so that you can get that edge to strike to the target. With the European sword, it's spring tempered. You have
Both
a lot
edges all the
more.
time.
Yeah, you use both edges all the time, and you're changing your hand position all the time. You can change your hand. You can twist your pommel hand. You can twist your forehand, and every part of that weapon every part of that sword is a weapon. You have the pommel. You have this. This is a warhammer. Here's a mace. Every part of it, we do calf swording. These are a lot of techniques that we don't do in sparring because they're just too dangerous. But anyway, I love to hear people say, well, it's a better sword. No, it's not really. They're made pretty much the same way. They're just different tools for the same job. It just depends on what you prefer.
Don't the Japanese love the single cut? Don't they talk all the time about the one cut?
One cut and one kill, right? So,
Yeah,
that's the exact same thing as me cutting guard and stabbing him in the face. Right?
One thing you need to understand is 70%, we've done the study, 70% of all the samurai duels ended in mutual death or mortal wounds. Okay?
All
the
European
one
ones
cut
too.
When they stand there and they try and feel out, you stand there and you try and feel out your opponent. I mean, we do this all the time. We try to avoid this, but if you go to cut somebody in a tournament, in a HEMA tournament, if I go and I cut him and he cuts me, okay, unless he does this right, I can cycle out and cut him immediately afterwards. How long does it take a person to die?
A lot longer than that.
I saw some footage, pretty grisly, about 30 seconds, depending on where you get them. So the thing is, the one cut, you cut somebody, sure, you cut them, but they're still alive enough to take you with them. So yeah, if you can get that, I mean, that's perfection, and you know, love the Japanese culture, speak the language, okay? But, you know, and that's what we kind of strive for as well, to get into the tournament and perform what they call a master cut, where if Maya performs a master cut on me, it's both a defense and an attack at the same time. I'm going to simply perform a regular like overcut to him. He's going to perform what we call a Scheitelhau, and you will see how he defends and attacks at the same time. Okay? No, Scheitelhau. Scheitelhau. Scheitelhau.
Okay.
Scheitelhau. Okay, now watch. Look what he's done. He's stepped out to the 45, increased my distance to attack, decreased his distance to attack. My sword is nowhere near him, and he's got his sword stuck in my head. Okay? So the one cut, yes, the master cuts maybe, they're a little bit more complicated. One cut, you can do it, but
I think it's definitely like a Japanese thing. It's not a...
yeah, it's a very Zen Buddhist thing, which is beautiful.
Look up your sword guard. Oh. Okay, so we'll move back into some bits here. Okay, who's seen this 1,000 times in movies? Anybody? Raise your hand. All right, everyone, right? Okay, guard's gonna do that same thing to me. This is what would really happen in a fight.
I'm the spinner?
Yeah, go ahead.
Martial arts, you're gonna get hit every now and then. You probably got a nice little scratch to remember ComicCon by. Next time.
All right. John, you ready?
Yeah, good.
You can do yours, man.
Okay, yeah, cool. So I'm all good. No worries. Okay, so okay, put my finger back on, and I'm back in action. So, what's that? Gloves. Oh yeah. Well, I'm not going to be the one getting hit on this time. So, this is one of my favorite myths that we see all the time, and I call it banter at the bind. Okay, and that looks something like this.
You drink the last Pepsi!
Oh, the Pepsi is mine!
It's your turn to take out the garbage!
Oh no!
Okay,
So this seems like, you know, you come to that cross sword bind, and it seems like the perfect opportunity to, like, you know, talk, deliver dialogue, and soliloquy. Well, a good time to talk in a fight is before you get to that close in what the Germans called Krieg range, or war, because someone's dying. And so, as you've seen, sword fighting happens very quickly. So as soon as you reach that bind, your goal is to kill the other person, not tell them your life story. So this is what would actually happen in that type of situation. I've now ruined like half of all sword movies for you. So the next time you see that happen in a movie, you'll know better. You're like, oh, that guy should be dead right now. Has everyone else gone? Okay, so let's. Let's see what else we have to cover real quick here.
We're all looking at the screens just like you. It's awesome. Practice makes perfect. I'm good.
Can we get the PowerPoint?
Click on a film.
Okay, let's go back. All right, so as mentioned, we are all members of True Edge Academy. So if you're interested in learning more about what it is we do, you can go to our website, trueedgeacademy.com, or to our Facebook page. We also have, I'll put some cards out here, and there's a little sign-up sheet for more information if you might be interested in coming out to one of our classes here in Salt Lake or down in Provo. And a couple of projects we're working on this year to check out. One, Spirit Squad Crime Fighting Cheerleaders. So this is Kung Fu style martial arts and cheerleaders beating us all up. So booth H6 here at ComicCon, they're talking about their crowdfunding campaign to fund that. Also a movie called Hidden World. So you can go to telekinesisentertainment.com to kind of follow that over the course of the year as we work on sword fights for that movie as well. So we've talked about some of the various myths. If you want to follow some of the other projects that I'm working on, you can go to Facebook, Utah Fight Director, to learn more. And now we're going to take the remainder of the time to do a little Q&A. There's a Q&A mic on the left and right of the stage if you want to come up to that to ask your questions and anything that we talked about or related to sword fighting or choreography. If no one comes up, then we'll just keep talking. So.
First question.
Alice here wants to know how much a sword weighs. Yeah.
You want to come up?
I don't
Good.
think, okay, fine.
But go ahead.
So I have two quick questions. First,
is
where
Q&A.
can I find swords like these to practice with, things like that? Where would you recommend?
So one of my most of these swords came from the place where all good things come from, the internet. And one of my favorite websites is called cultofathena.com. That's cult with a K. And they are a reseller for swords, and they've got very inexpensive swords and very high-end swords, and great customer service, great prices, so that's what I would recommend checking out.
And one other question was, who would win, a Kendo master or a saber fencer?
Depends on who trains harder.
True trains and hardest.
Yeah,
I'll buy it.
who's the best
The
fighter?
more
I'll
you
bet.
sweat in the dojo, the less you bleed on the battlefield.
Good to know. Awesome.
So for your buying sword things, Cult of Athena has good swords, but they also have tons of crappy swords as well. So I mean, if you want to see like buy a sword that's like made for what we do, I would look up go to like a HEMA website, and they usually have references to good sword vendors and things like that. Best swords are Albions. You won't go wrong with any of the swords that they do.
If you want to get really crazy, you can go get a custom John Bones. This is one I made because I can't afford an actual blade. I can't afford an outfit, like $1,000.
They're like 500.
Not like this.
Well, okay, the sharp ones are like 1,000.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I have one question. There's a classic image of like Conan the Barbarian with a sword and an axe, dual wielding. How feasible is that? Is it really practical for combat?
Not really. You usually have a primary weapon and maybe a secondary smaller weapon. So maybe like so there's rapier and dagger, sword and buckler, sword and dagger, sword and cloak. There is one manual I think the master mentions. This is how you use 2 rapiers. It's not a good idea, but this is how it works. And it's the only one that's really mentioned, so they even didn't think it was a good idea.
I mean, the thing really is that you get a lot of this in movies, and really two weapons generally leads to somebody wanting to windmill around like so. Right? And we all saw how that ended just a second ago. So, yeah, there are plenty of movies that will show you that. It's not a super good idea, like John just said. If you're not very good at using one weapon, why try and use 2? That's just even worse idea. However,
John's going to tell you about, I mean, the thing is people don't realize is if you go and you look at historical evidence and the study that's going on, the shield is a weapon.
So that bucklers are a way to fight as well.
That's basically
Usually there's a spike on it, but masters have written all kinds of weapon combinations and things like that, and usually it's one big kind of big and one small, but it's never 2 big things.
One thing you rarely see in movies is this combination called a sword and buckler, which was actually the most popular weapon combination through much of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And that was because it's easy to carry around. We get the term swashbuckler from people just having it on their belt. And with a buckler, you can keep it extended to provide a lot of defense from someone attacking you. And you can then easily cut around it as you're fighting, okay? And use it to protect the most exposed part of your body, which is your extended arm. And that's why, arm cuts would be very common in a real sword fight.
So, next question. A larger shield, like the Romans would use, or, full body, not such a small shield.
okay, so the gentleman asked about big shields, kite shields, and tower shields, and that sort of thing. So those were certainly used on the battlefield. The big thing that we have a problem with is there's not really contextual evidence for how they fought with those things. So we don't usually do that at our club, so we can't really demonstrate it with any effective efficacy. Certainly they were used on the battlefield. By the time this particular weapon, the longsword, came into existence, the big thing to do on the battlefield was to wear armor, right? So that's another great sword myth that I'm going to bust right now. By the time full plate armor came into existence, it was because of weapons like this. So weapons like this were meant to pierce through the older style of armor, which was called mail. Everybody knows it colloquially as chainmail. So you could try really hard to stick this through chainmail, but armor, plate armor, was about the same thickness as this. And as you just saw, there was no way going to cut through that. So in movies, when you see people cut through somebody's armor, that's where you need to just kind of enjoy the show afterwards. It's a pretty bad idea to show somebody cutting through armor because it's just not going to happen.
Next question.
Oh, wait,
You got
Wait, one thing to add.
and another thing, another myth also is if you're wearing full metal, like a full plate armor, you're not going to have a shield as well because you're wearing you're carrying a shield on
Your
your
whole entire body is covered in a shield.
I was just wondering, do you guys practice with axes and maces and things like that too?
So, not to any large degree. All the fighting manuals that we have today were mostly swords. There were some pole arms, spears, and quarterstaffs and that type of thing. But generally, warhammers, maces, hand axes, they're not super elegant. And you pick it up, you know what end to hit the person with, and you hit them on the head, rinse and repeat. So there's not that much technique to it.
I mean, you can perform the same techniques. It's just they're going to be a little bit, they're end heavy, not like a sword. They're going to be end heavy, and you're going to block over, and you're going to be sitting there for a minute trying to get your momentum to go back the other direction.
As you've already mentioned, one of my pet peeves in sword movies is when they cut through somebody wearing armor, just cut right through it with a sword. So with that, you mentioned briefly half swording, and I've been wondering why that hasn't shown up as frequently in movies. Is it because it just doesn't look quite as dynamic, or is it because of the inherent danger of practicing those techniques?
I would say it's just because most fight choreographers aren't even aware of it.
So who here knows what half sorting is besides obviously the gentleman? All right, great, perfect. 5 of you, right? So half sorting is this, right? So obviously we talked about swords being bendy. Half sorting is the technique that you would use for somebody in armor because you can't cut through their armor. They're going to have places in their defenses that are vulnerable. So under the arms and the groin, their head, their neck, obviously all these pieces need to move. So what we would try and do is try and get in to do this. Obviously I'm going to die here, right? But there's a lot of sophisticated techniques that you can use with the half sword. Obviously I could come back over here and try and beat John to death, and then he would stab me under the arm. So half sorting is just grabbing your sword by the half and making it stiffer and giving it better aim.
Giving yourself leverage.
Another thing about that is movies like to be pretty dynamic, so you swing all the way around and you swing all the way back to the other side. The bigger the motions, the more hooray movies. And when you do half sorting, it's a lot of wrestling, so it's a bunch of robots wrestling and trying to stick little things into the little other things. So
yeah, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, it's not as pretty, I guess, for movies' sake, I guess.
I've seen
Down Excalibur, the sword fighting, and the way they have the sparking.
Oh yeah. So.
swords.
I understand that's titanium plating.
It's doing this.
Sparking.
This is coming in and out.
Yeah, that's all right. I can hear.
But can you guys, what is your opinion of such things?
All right, so the gentleman, despite the mic cutting out there, bad battery or something, what he was asking is in movies you see, and actually at medieval times, in the Las Vegas king killing extravaganza or whatever they are, you see a lot of swords flying around, and every time they touch each other there's a big splash of sparks, right? And yes, definitely that is titanium coated. They work just like flint and steel. But absolutely, when you put swords against each other at speed, pieces of them are going to fly off, and those pieces are going to be white hot, and it looks like sparks, and it looks awesome. So yeah, a lot of times you see it.
Is there a danger?
Oh yeah. There's always danger whenever you're getting a sword.
I mean, from the sparks to
Yeah,
the knives.
I mean, not as much as that, but yeah, I mean, it will hurt for sure.
I think mine hurt, but
Yeah.
it's the capacity bothers me.
Yeah, so whenever we spar at speeds like that, we actually wear masks and all that kind of stuff, so we're completely protected.
It
Next.
happens so infrequently.
With the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, how approximately realistic are some of those sword fights?
They have swords in them.
Next question. Actually, well, I think we're out of time, so I'm sorry for, but yeah, the answer is not super realistic at all. Rapiers are designed to poke the other person with. They don't have enough mass to cleave through flesh, really, so they make ineffective weapons in that regard.
Got one more question over here. One more.
Yay.
Okay, so I actually do some rapier fighting, and I was wondering how often do you guys actually teach and practice that? And if you do, what are your favorite styles?
So I do it on occasion, practice rapier and mostly Italian Renaissance.
Yeah, because I'm part of the SCA and I like to mix up the Germanic and Italian. I'm not a huge fan of Spanish, but I was just wondering how effective would that be on a real life basis of reality?
So I think, foining or rapier fencing, it would be very effective provided your opponent doesn't have armor and doesn't have a gun, and but you would rarely see a rapier on the battlefield because it's just not that effective against armor. And in fact, during there was a time when they would fencers would hide a chainmail shirt under their shirt, and because then the rapier would break off it. So that's when they started at that point taking their shirts off to duel, and we get the modern term, whoa, I don't want to fight you, keep your shirt on. So rapiers and armor do not mix well. So, all right, well, thanks everyone for your time. Have a fun ComicCon.
It's awesome.